Welcome. I'm Jessica Tejan, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. I am extremely excited for this episode because we have a guest with us today, Emily. She's from a fantastic new startup in the St. Louis area called Curate. She is an HR professional in a small-sized business, which is always great to get that perspective of what it's like to experience those businesses. So we're looking forward to getting her perspective on what it's like to be in HR in a small business and what challenges you're experiencing right now today in the people space and how you're overcoming those challenges. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in this week and start talking about your experience. So maybe if you want to just start us off with just a brief introduction of who you are and how you've come to be in the HR and talent management professions.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Jessica, for inviting me on to this episode. Really excited to be here chatting with you. I have been in HR for about 13-ish plus years in some capacity. And whether it was, as an HR generalist slash office manager slash benefits administrator, at small companies that I've worked for in the past, or if it's building out the function like I'm doing now currently and what I did at my previous tech startup that I worked for. Have just broad experience and exposure to all things HR and people related. And I love it. I think, working for small organizations in particular, being able to have a direct impact on the employees and the employee experience and managers and leadership and culture and just all the things really is what keeps me going, what makes me happy.
So you mentioned there that one of the things you really like or part of your experience is having to build the function. So for people that haven't been in a small organization or an HR department of one, what does that mean, building the function? What does that look like? And I imagine that's even more prominent or even more the case when you're working in a startup where there really wasn't a lot of things in place before.
Yeah, for sure. It's really, putting in the infrastructure, policies, processes, putting together the like an employee handbook, the all encompassing, just, everything about kind of how we do things, why we do things, that sort of thing. And then from there, implementing the tools that are needed, HRIS and for all the just employee connection points, communication tools, all of those things for internal communication and management, and really just kind of starting with that foundation, and then aligning sort of what the initiatives and what determining what's important and when, kind of based on what the company objectives and goals are, and what the mission is, and sort of just aligning all of those pieces together. But yeah, building up from that foundation is really the key. And then from there, it's just building on top of it and iterating and improving kind of as you go. But yeah, for most startups and small organizations and startups in particular, they might have some of the software tools in place, but aren't really using those to, leveraging those to their full capacity, and automating certain areas that can be automated and whatnot. And so it's just, yeah, really just kind of building that base and build or laying that foundation and then building on top of it.
So I think what's interesting, I think what a lot of people probably don't know, if they're especially if they're not in HR or if they're in businesses without a lot of function there, or maybe functions that have existed for a long time, is how much process and different elements there are. So in a big company,
Mhm,
or even a mid-sized company, they have somebody who does recruitment and onboarding, and then they have somebody who and so there's a lot of focus around talent attraction and how you recruit and scan candidates, and that can be a full-time job in and of itself. Even in a small company, that can
mhm,
become pretty daunting. And then you've got people that are doing learning and development, and then performance management, and then so you've got all these different, functions, the compliance, the handbooks, and all these different pieces, and you actually have expertise, individuals with that expertise in those areas. So when
mhm.
you're an HR department of one, you have to pull upon a lot of other resources. So I'm curious how what you use to bring in, like how you bring in resources, or whether you bring past practices that you've used or processes that you've used, or whether you're always, completely starting from scratch, and how you kind of tackle implementing across so many different significant functions with a lot of activity in all of them. I mean, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of elements that go into all of them. And from somebody who did it similarly, who is built from the ground up, an HR department, it's a lot of work to put all those pieces in place, and there's a lot of elements. So how where do you go for resources, or how do you go about deciding where to start and where to focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fortunate now in this day and age, and the software tools that are out there that help so much with this. For instance, when I first started with this company, we were going to be adding a lot of several team members, and so recruiting was going to be a big focus. And as you said, that recruiting is a big thing. It takes a lot of time, and so I implemented an applicant tracking system right away just to help not only myself keep track of all the candidates and communication and everything, but for managers, interviewing interviewers and hiring managers, just to have that one source of truth for everyone to easily communicate through and move candidates along without having to have those manually or having to think about asking people for feedback on this person or that person. So that was a big thing, and leveraging other tools as much as possible to automate whatever pieces I can. Implemented a performance management system to help enable those one-on-one conversations between managers and employees. And I can see the weekly check-ins. I have visibility into the weekly pulses, so I can see, just from an engagement standpoint, how employees are doing. And really lucky just with all the amount of HR tools that are out there that enable me to carry out all of those different pieces without, to your point, of having a department for each one or a specialist for each one. And priorities are always shifting, and I might be focusing on recruitment for one quarter in particular, or whatever that might look like, but then still trying to balance those other pieces and just the regular day-to-day administrative components to HR. And so it's just keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on, determining what's going to be important, understanding what the business goals are, and then kind of going from there to determine, okay, what could be the most impactful thing? Where is my time going to be spent, or where should my time be spent to deliver on those most impactful initiatives that could really make a difference?
I love this is so interesting because you've been in the field about as long as I have, and when you go back to the beginning, or at least this was my experience, that technology wasn't all there yet. So,
Right.
like, today now there's these technologies that you're right. I mean, it makes an applicant tracking system where you can keep track of your recruiting and your hiring is transformational. I remember
Mhm.
back to the spreadsheet days and trying to
Yes.
keep track of manual resumes, like printed resumes, and
Mhm.
I was even in my early career, I was even faxing background checks, which
Yeah.
is just seems crazy now, right? Like that's all automated and it's so much smoother. And so thinking back to from that point, how much technology has helped to streamline, especially the activities in HR that probably we hate the most,
Mhm.
all those administrative and
Right.
filing. And I remember I used to have to dedicate like a day to just getting files in order and making sure things went into personnel files and all of that kind of thing. So that's such a great insight, and I think it's probably unique to that you're in this tech startup space where technology is valued, where we're going
Mhm.
to
Right.
leverage and use the automation of technology,
Mhm.
versus maybe some other organizations or sectors that either they're homegrown or they've been family companies and are maybe not in the tech space and are maybe more resistant to making those investments or seeing the return on those investments. And it shocks
Mhm.
me to this day when I find people who are in these businesses who are doing things so manually and how much time it's taking, and they don't even recognize how much value they could get out of streamlining some of those
Right.
practices.
Right. It's like, there's an app for that. Like
Yeah.
you could just do that.
And there's probably like 200 that you could
Right.
pick from. Like it's and when I first picked some of the HR automation tools, like there really wasn't that many to choose from.
Mhm.
There were especially in terms of affordability, there were really expensive ones, but now there are so many tech startups in the HR space with different tools that it makes a huge difference. Any technology that you like just absolutely love and would recommend? Like, is there certain systems you use that are just incredibly valuable to you?
Yeah, so 15.5 is one that I can't recommend enough. I've used other performance management platforms, and I mean, I feel like they're all great in their own way, but 15.5 is just very employee centric and focuses on the entire employee as a being, as a person,
Mhm.
and it's just it has everything. We run our performance or best self reviews cycles through the platform. As I mentioned, managers hold their one-on-ones. They have all of their notes in the platform. We manage our OKRs through the platform. I send employee surveys through the platform. It's just, yeah, it highly recommend 15.5.
Oh, I'm sure that makes life just so
It
much
does.
easier. Now,
Yeah.
technology is an important part of what we do, but there's a lot of other challenges, we encounter. So I'm curious what you've been going through. What are some of the biggest challenges that you and your organization, or you from an HR perspective, have experienced over the last 12 to 18 months?
Well, I think a big one that many of us have felt is, the economy, the downturn, and unfortunately, layoffs within the tech industry have been very prominent over the last few months. And we're seeing a lot about the tech giants who are laying off, thousands or tens of thousands of their employees, which is extremely, unfortunate. But there's also the small and medium-sized businesses that unfortunately are having to do the same thing, and our organization was no exception to that, unfortunately. Our software is used by professionals in the event space, florists, caterers, event planners, and such, and you know events, just the event space in general is has definitely come back from COVID, but there's still so much uncertainty and things happening in the economy that Unfortunately, we had to have a reduction in force last month, and had to downsize. And so, it's definitely a challenge when you're already a small organization and then you have to let go of 20 to 25% of your employees. And so, but the work still needs to be done. You're just trying to, now you have to distribute it among less people. And so trying to manage that and support employees and everything has it's been a challenge.
One of the things that had me reach out to you was that article you posted or shared about the financial accounting and how that drives the HR decisions, that how we look at our financials. And coming from that, I've probably been through half a dozen reduction in forces as an executive leader, and looking at the financials to make that decision and to look at how many people you have to reduce and what numbers you have to target. It really does drive that outcome and that result. And it's almost never about there's not enough work to do. I mean,
Right.
there's almost always, I think the only exception I had to that was when we had to actually shut down a business when the in the oil and gas market a number of years ago. So that we actually weren't going to do that work anymore. But with the exception of that, most of the time the work, people were busy. People were doing things. Whether it
Mhm.
was all, best performance and of the most value, that's questionable, but they were busy. They were executing. And so now, like you said, the people that are still there have to pick up that load. So
Mhm.
I like to talk about when we address reductions in workforce, that there's a lot of trauma involved.
Yeah.
And labeling that process as trauma, not just for the people who are let go, which certainly losing a job is huge trauma. I recently saw an article that talked about that when you change jobs or lose your job, it is actually more impactful on your mental health than a divorce, that it takes longer to recover from a,
Wow.
a job transition than a divorce, which is, it really
That's
r
huge.
really, really big deal. But
Mhm.
also the people, the leaders, you as in HR having to do those meetings, to have those discussions, and
Mm.
then and then for the employees that are left, that are picking up all of that load, and question, that maybe their really close friend is no longer there, and how they navigate those relationships. There's just
Mm.
a lot of pain and trauma in there. What do you do, if anything? I'll admit that a lot of organizations, including mine, at certain points didn't necessarily um, do a lot, or take that into account. What are some of the things that you do to try to support the employees who are still there, the people that are picking up that load?
Yeah, well, if it's that article that you mentioned, so it's very interesting the impact to hear that comparison from losing your job or changing and compared to a divorce. Yeah, that I mean that just goes to show that the connection people feel, I think, toward to their job and what they do, and how significant it is when they feel that impact that deeply. And then for the employees who remain, there's definitely a grieving period when they have to say goodbye to their friends potentially, or just these people that they work alongside, and um, com- combating that survivor's guilt. And we try to we're still kind of in that period of rebuilding trust. I feel like even the most well handled, well designed layoffs leave those remaining employees feeling some type of way, and like that trust is shaken. And so rebuilding that trust is just so imperative. The trust in the company and leadership. And so focusing on transparency and keeping employees apprised of what's going on, our revenue metrics and product customer data, and all of the things that we can be as an open and transparent about, and fostering just that regular two-way communication, not only between like managers and their employees, but also leadership and our executives through the whole team. And that, to your point, yeah, we let go of all these people, but the work's still there. The work didn't go anywhere, and trying to support employees through that transition for the ones that are taking on that additional workload. We've created a couple of new positions out of as a result of the RIF, and there's some employees who are doing kind of a hybrid of what they did before and what a former employee perhaps did, but dispersing as much of that work among the department or team as possible, and just being really clear on kind of the priorities and those goals or OKRs, and managers just being there to support their employees with as much guidance and along the way, and removing any roadblocks, and just yeah, being there to really guide them through it is really important.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really key, which is the transparency piece. And I think one of the things, and my background, I'm an attorney by trade. I went to law school, and so I've got kind of that legal background. But oftentimes when we go through reduction in forces, especially if you're getting outside legal advice, it's very sterile. It's very
Mm,
like, you do these steps, don't talk about why, don't talk about the rationale, don't, even though you have it.
right,
And one of the things I found was that the more transparent we could be, the more we said, these were the factors that we considered. And we went through an extensive analysis in making that decision. And it wasn't like, oh, I like this person and I don't like this person, but it was really
right,
based on data and information and background experience, the value, all the different pieces. And then the more we told people about the financials leading up to that. So the more we communicated where we were, and yep, we're in a struggling point and we got to look at how we're going to reduce costs, so that then when it happens, I mean, you don't tell everybody the day it's going to happen or anything, but when it happens, people, it makes sense to them. It's not
right.
a complete surprise. And that when you do those steps, it makes a huge, huge difference. The other thing we used to do is we would actually create like written documents that would go out with like all the questions that people would want answers to,
Mm,
because we found that a lot of people were too afraid to ask the questions. They were too
right.
afraid at that point to come and ask. And if we did it in that way, and managers were really then immediately having conversations with their teams, reassuring people, going over information, it settled people down a lot faster than leaving that kind of frenzied, response.
Right.
And one of
Mhm.
the things when I refer to it as trauma, what happens is that we're actually triggered, in terms of our nervous systems, by such a significant event, and so we get into this fight
Mm,
or flight, high stress, and
mhm.
that then perpetuates other dramas. So there's more conflict, there's more frustration, people are quicker to snap at each other,
Right.
so it's because they're in that state. So if you can lower that, if you can take those steps to do the right things as best as you can. Obviously, you want to stay do things legally and appropriately, but the more that you can do that in a kind and respectful way, the
Mhm.
better the results for everybody involved.
Absolutely. Like using, just being empathetic in all of the planning and support and everything throughout the entire process of this type of situation is super important. And I think that's the only way, if the remaining employees feel like, okay, yeah, this is what we had to do as a company to stay in business, to stay as a company, then at least we did it in a compassionate and empathetic way towards those that we had to say goodbye to.
And that makes a big difference when you have
Mhm.
leaders that are willing to communicate in that way, to operate in that way, to express their own, vulnerability and emotions in
Mhm.
response to the experience. And I think that's something else that a lot of leaders can learn from, is that, admitting to the employees that are staying the impact it's had on you, or the struggle, and that, like, that you too feel the
Mhm.
effect, and it creates more of a bond around, and more of a connection around the experience, rather than creating a break in the relationship, or a separation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that common, um, yeah, that common bond connection, as you said. That's just a great way to put it. Going through that experience together and being vulnerable and opening up about it shows the employees it's okay to do that. It's okay to, feel a certain way about it. It's natural. We're all human, and we all found ourselves in this unfortunate situation, but we're connected by this, and we're going to stay connected going forward, and do what we can to achieve that progress that we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears just a little bit, what do you find to be your biggest struggle that you're facing right now on a regular basis? So what is kind of that biggest challenge outside of the major shift in terms of the reduction in force? What are some of the things that, or the biggest thing that you're facing as a solo HR person, having to manage through?
So yeah, for me personally, I would say, just, well, as a result of the riff, I had a person on my team. I had a people ops coordinator who was fantastic, and helped me kind of in all areas. And unfortunately, as we downsized the team, we didn't need as large of an HR department of two. We really, so it there weren't as many employees to support, and so unfortunately, the position was eliminated. So, but in all of my planning for the riff, and for all the communication and all the pieces that went into it, I never really took the time to absorb the fact that I would be absorbing this person's workload as well. And so adjusting to that, over the past month and a half has definitely been, it has been a challenge. Just for me personally, is I mean, being an HR department of one isn't new to me, but that, that transition, that change, taking on that additional workload, while still, having the same workload that I had prior to, has definitely been a challenge that I'm trying to navigate and continue to navigate as best I can.
How do you that can lead to a lot of excess stress, and there's a lot of talk right now about, levels of stress and burnout, and, when you go through reduction in force, of course, that adds more work. So if people were potentially already stressed,
Yeah.
and, then that just kind of compounds the challenge. Do you feel like that is a challenge either for yourself or the other employees within your organization right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I worry about all the time, for not just me, but for everyone else on the team. Because, we're always thinking about retention and wanting people to stay and keeping people engaged and inspired and all of those things. Um, and for me personally, even, I mean, uh, I've taken a couple of mental health days over the last, month and a half, and it's been needed. Even though, I know the work's still going to be here when I get back, but just taking a break and stepping aside from it, not having to think about it for a couple of days, I think is really important. But also, and for everybody else, as well, who are just have maybe been feeling like they're go 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 since losing their team members. It's so important to take that time, and so us as a, as leadership, just relaying that message, setting that example by taking time ourselves, and just offering that support, whatever that might look like. If somebody's, if they notice somebody's working, like they're online just like all night, or working way too into the wee hours of the morning, or whatever that might look like, talking with that person and saying, hey, like, what's going on? What can I do to help you? What can I take off of your plate? Um, so that you have time to recharge, or whatever that looks like for you.
Right.
Um, but yeah, really just trying to offer as much support as possible, and thinking creatively in ways that we can, maybe there are other areas of the work that we can automate, and with a tool that maybe we already have, and there's a piece of it we're not using, or what that might look like, if investing in new tools isn't really an option either. But yeah, I think it just comes down to that support, encouraging those breaks and that time off, and along the way, and setting that example as leaders is really important.
I love that you talked about mental health days because for a long time that was a stigma. It was kind of a joke. Like they're taking
Mhm.
a mental health day. What is that? Right? That was
Right.
like
Like you didn't want anybody to know, like,
yeah,
oh,
why are you doing that? What does that mean? Is there something
yeah,
wrong? And it's interesting because we separate in our minds somehow mental health from physical health when really it's all part of the same body. Like
all
it's
connected.
all part of the same thing. And so it's not lesser than being physically sick. In
Right.
some cases, the stress can be just as detrimental as physical illness
Hmm.
to our bodies, to our immune systems long term.
Yeah.
And so it's actually preventative and probably equally important as people staying home when they're, physically sick, which also for a long time there was even, stigma against that, right? Of you come to work anyway, people would come to work, coughing and like totally a
Hmm.
mess. And, I think the pandemic, if it did anything, it allowed us to maybe say, like, "If you're really sick, stay like, just work from
Yeah.
home now,"
Yeah.
Like, don't get
Hmm.
everybody else sick, like, that's more acceptable practice, I think, nowadays, but I think
Yes.
eliminating that stigma around mental health and creating I really like what you said about leaders setting an example there, and that taking care of your whole health, is just as important because, I know from my experience, you end up having to stay home because you got a sick kid or you're
Right.
physically sick or you're and then you're trying to come back from what was already stress or and so it can compound really quickly to long term
Mhm.
to have long term impacts. And if you can create some of that space and some of that putting some of that energy into that time, I think that's a really big value for employees today.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, I think if, COVID, it obviously rocked our world in many, many ways. But I think one thing it did, it shined a light so much on mental health and the importance of it, and the direct correlation between that and performance, even, and physical health, and all the things. It really just in the last few years since the pandemic, it's been destigmatized, and I think that's just a huge thing, that a huge positive I think we can say came out of such a dark time.
Yeah. So, if you could bring anything to your business, if you could bring from an HR and talent management perspective to the employees into your business to help support your business, what would you bring? What do you think would really bring the most value given the challenges you're facing right now and the experiences you've got? What would you like to be delivering or bringing to your business the most right now?
Resources to combat burnout, whether it's outside resources coming in to talk with leaders or managers, to just help kind of develop and build on those leadership skills in ways that are more impactful to the employee experience and the employee purpose and meaning, and really just focusing on that. And because I think again, if people feel connected to what they're doing, if they feel that what they're doing has purpose and meaning, it makes it that much easier for them to enjoy what they're doing. And burnout, I mean, burnout is inevitable if you're burning the candles at both ends. But I think, somebody who is truly, intrinsically motivated and passionate and loves what they do, that burnout is less likely for those people to happen. So yeah, I think just resources, whatever that might look like from, external, outside coaches or people that could maybe help our leadership team to equip them with ways that they can really help their employees and support them in that, I think would be really cool to bring in.
Yeah, and I think, we've heard that a lot from a lot of HR leaders around burnout, and I went through my own burnout experience. It was what led me to leave, the corporate space for a while because I really had to do some recovering that I didn't even
Mhm.
realize what was going on. But when we talk about burnout, we look at it as kind of 3 different elements, and I think this can be really helpful to those who maybe are struggling or wondering if they're struggling. The ways we look at it is kind of the 3 elements that start a fire. And that burnout really isn't a big explosion, it's like a slow burn. It's like a spark
Yes.
that just
Mhm.
slowly builds. And I think that's why it can be missed, and it certainly was why I missed it because
Mhm.
it was this slow accumulation of multiple things over a really long time, and it wasn't, like a big, all of a sudden can't get out of bed, it was a slow process. So I look at it as the 3 elements of fire. So the first is, oxygen. You have to have oxygen to have a fire, you have to have a fuel, and then you have to have a spark. So if you have those 3 things, that's what starts a fire. So oxygen is our environment. So if there's a
Mm.
workplace environment that has a lot of stress, really high workplace demands, not a lot of recognition, all the things that create, a more challenging workplace. So a lack of engagement, a lack of a positive employee experience. If you've got a workplace that has those components, and then you combine it with the fuel, which is our own self-limiting beliefs and fears. So
Mm.
our fear of failure or our need for perfectionism or our we don't have enough self-worth if we don't deliver enough or things like that that then create the behaviors that cause us to push ourselves too far, that cause us
Mm.
to keep going when we should stop. And
Yeah.
then the spark is the life challenges that just happened, the
Mm.
pandemic, the childbirth, pregnancy, health issues, job losses. It's the things that you can't actually do anything about. Those
Mhm.
things just happen. And so because we can't do anything about the spark, the thing that actually ignites and starts the slow burn. We really have to pay attention to the environment and to ourselves, to
Yeah.
our own internal practices and behaviors. And so those are really the things that when we want to look at and address burnout, we want to look at. And so I love that you talked about, meaning and purpose, because that's one of those elements that really contributes to high levels of engagement and a positive work experience. And so if you've got things like meaning and purpose and you've got lots of recognition and appreciation and
Mhm.
you've got really clear expectations, people know what they're supposed to do, they're getting feedback on that, they're getting development and growth opportunities. If those elements that are part of high engagement engagement levels are there, then that work environment doesn't push someone into burnout. And then likewise, if you can equip individuals with the practices that help them not to or help them to manage those limiting beliefs, those fears, those
Mm.
things that get in the way, or have them push harder than they should, or keep going when they need a break, or don't take care of themselves, then that also helps to alleviate the getting to burnout. And so that's kind of how we look at it. And I love that you kind of talked about the meaning and purpose and those engagement elements, because those are really like one of those preventative factors.
Yeah, I love that analogy, or three elements to make a fire, and it's so true. I mean, burnout is it's a slow burn. It's a small leak, and then that one spark or something that triggers the explosion, or the pipe to burst, whatever that looks like. It's so true, because yeah, you don't always notice it when you're deep in the trenches and you're just trying to do what you do, and then your limiting beliefs of yourself. That's another. I already, mentioned 15-5 earlier and recommended it, and the best self reviews, or what we call the performance review cycle. It's focusing more on asking questions that really truly help to develop those people, and that feedback, and giving that feedback in constructive ways to ultimately help them grow and realize what their strengths are, and leaning on those strengths. And yeah, so it just is all connected. But I love that analogy that you use to describe it.
Yeah, and it really does make such a difference when you're doing good performance practices like that. That really makes that more of a hygiene factor than a risk
Hmm.
factor, and really can help impact, those outcomes and those results. And one of the challenges is once somebody gets into burnout, so if you can prevent it, you're in much better shape, because once somebody gets into burnout, it's not an easy road to recovery. It's not like you just wake up, you get a couple nights sleep, and then you're better. It's a
Right.
process to get yourself beyond that point, because you've put yourself into a physical state. And so, one of the things I saw a video on one of the social media platforms. It was a comedy or a joke video of a doctor, who's clearly burned out, and coming to HR, and HR saying, "Well, here, take this course on resiliency." And the doctor's like, "Well, when am I supposed to take this? Like, can I take some time off to take this course?" "No, you do that on your own time, and that'll, you just need to be more resilient, and then you'll overcome it." And it was super funny, right? Because it's like the course is not going to help at this point.
Right.
Like the course
Right.
might have helped like 5 years ago if they
Mhm.
understood, if you built in the practices or whatever. But that's not going to
Right.
help at this point. And so when you get to that point of like lots of stress and into burnout, that's where people really need support to get themselves out of it. They need a
Yeah.
coach, or a therapist, or someone who can help them walk through the shifts that they need to make to recover from the experience that they've had. And
Yes,
so if
absolutely.
workplaces can address the preventative things, that's going to be way more cost effective. But if they're getting people into burnout and they really want to remedy it, and they should, because the performance impacts of burnout are huge. People
Mhm.
are I think that's a huge part of the quiet quitting um conversation that's going on right now, of people quiet quitting. I think that's a great example of burnout. Is
Yeah.
I'm going to keep coming, but I don't really care anymore. Like, I'm
Mhm.
just here.
It's just
And
that, like, disassociation
yep,
completely.
disengage. Well, I'm here at my desk, and it'll look like I'm doing plenty, but I'm not. I don't really care. And
Right.
now you really have an impact and a burn on your business. And so if you can do the preventative things, or get those systems and structures in place to prevent it, you're going to be just so much better off in the long run. So it's great when organizations can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation. I think it'll be really helpful to get, for our listeners to hear some of these perspectives. Any final thoughts you want to offer? Anything you want to share as we wrap up here?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me on. This has been just awesome getting to talk to you. And really, I do have a little bit of advice for my fellow people practitioners. Take care of yourself. We're the ones. We focus on taking care of everyone else. Our employees and team and everything, and helping people, but so it's easy to kind of lose track of what we need. So just be a self advocate, take care of yourself, take your breaks, take your mental health days, whatever you need. Um, yeah, just remember to take care of you, and you're doing a great job.
Such a great reminder. I am so glad you said that because HR professionals are some of the most burnt out individuals right now and are just and it is a really hard role when you're focused on everyone else and there's really nobody for you. There is no HR department for the HR department. So I
Yeah.
think that is a really great reminder, and the work that you do and HR leaders everywhere do is so important and so impactful and makes such a big difference. So I think that is such a great reminder. Thank you for those words of wisdom, and thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation. I so appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you. I loved being here with you.
So with that, we'll wrap up our conversation, and we will be back next week with another episode. So I just wanted to take a minute here to wrap up this podcast episode. It was so great to have Emily Dirkers on this podcast. It was so great making that connection and that relationship, and getting to hear her perspective and the experiences that she's had in her workplace. And I raised a number of different topics that I just wanted to provide some references around. So it talked about trauma, the trauma in reductions in force. And I wrote an article a while back that will tie in the show notes for you if you want to reference that. We also talked a bit about burnout. Similarly, I've done a couple of webinars on burnout. So if you want to check those out, learn a little bit more about the three factors of burnout and steps you can take. And we have resources on our website as well. As always, if you have any needs that we can support you in, reach out to us. We are looking for other HR talent management professionals who are interested in sharing their challenges, their story, what they're experiencing in their workplaces. So if you are an HR or talent management resource and you're interested in coming on and telling your story, please reach out to us. You can email us at contact@evolvingtoexceptional or reach out to us via our website page. We will be launching some very new, amazing resources and programs that address so much of what we've been talking about over the last year. So please stay tuned and follow us on social media. Look at what we're doing. There's going to be a lot more coming soon. We're very excited about the difference we can make. So if you're having any of these challenges we talked about today with burnout, with coaching your leaders and managers, with reduction in forces, please reach out to us. We would love to talk with you, help you in any way that we can, and see if there is any service that we can support or provide. I will look forward to talking with you guys all more next week, and I hope you have a fantastic week.